Welcome to the Wealthy SAP Consultant Podcast with your host, Anita Anello, where we empower SAP consultants to deliver premium services by showcasing their expertise to the world. In each episode, we dive deep into strategies, tips, and success stories to help SAP consultants like you elevate your consultancy game, attract high-paying clients, and maximize your revenue potential. Get ready to unlock the secrets to success in the SAP consulting world and position yourself as a top-tier consultant. To connect further and explore personalized strategies for your consulting business, schedule a strategy call with our team by clicking the link below. Enjoy the show. Hey, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today again on the Wealthy SAP podcast with your host, Anita Anello. I have my good friend, Jody Mayberry here with me today. So Jody, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to talk with you today.
Oh, Anita, it is great to see you. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk. I
Yeah.
always enjoy a good conversation.
I know. Awesome. So a little while ago, Jody and we're in a mastermind together with another friend of ours. And a while ago, Jody mapped out what he calls a swap framework. And one of the things that I wanted to share with our audience today is Jody's framework. So Jody, maybe give us a little bit of your backstory and then kind of how you came up with the framework, and then we'll dive right in.
Well, the backstory is actually relevant to where this came from. I used to be financial analyst who became a park ranger, which is, I know, an odd path, but so financial analyst, I worked on spreadsheets all day. My job was to measure interest rate risk, which is as exciting as it sounds. And then I became a park ranger because I said, well, I don't this job that if I do my job well, what does it really matter? So I'm going to go and do what I've always wanted to do, become a park ranger, which I did. I had to go back to school at night. Even though I had two bachelor's degrees, I had to go back to school, keep it a secret for a year, finally fulfill the boyhood dream of becoming a park ranger. And I had no idea what I was doing because it is it's just different
Yeah.
going from behind a desk to outdoors. But being a park ranger is as wonderful as you imagine it would be, unless you don't like the outdoors, and then you probably made a bad career choice.
Right.
But I'll jump ahead and tell you where this framework came from, because I said being a park ranger was really different. I didn't sometimes know what I was doing, and we had to give interpretive talks.
Oh, right.
So the in the campground, we'd start a campfire, promote it to the campground, get people to come. Well, I'd never given a talk like this before. I talked in spreadsheets, but they wouldn't let you do that for a campfire talk. Well, there was another ranger, Mac Mickelson. He was like the poster boy of what a park ranger should be. He was like
Okay.
6'4", really handsome, looked like Superman. And he gave a talk that people loved. Visitors would fill every seat to come and watch Mac do this talk about the many hats of a ranger.
Okay.
And he would put on a hat that we wore as a park ranger and then tell a story about the work we would do while wearing that hat. So he'd have like the black ball cap and the fire helmet and the iconic ranger flat hat and tell stories. So I thought, well, okay, well, that seems like a good idea. People like that. So I just tried to copy Mac, but I didn't want to straight copy him. So I brought all the different pants a ranger would wear and called the talk Ranger Pants, which seemed like a good idea at the time. It turned out not to be. And I wasn't very good. And I'm giving the talk, and about halfway through, a 10-year-old boy raised his hand, and I said, oh, finally a question, because I could tell it wasn't going well. And I thought, at least this boy will ask a question. This will get things moving. And I said, yes, what's your question? And he said, can I go now?
Oh
Oh, it,
no.
it was devastating. And then that prompted me, though, to figure out what am I doing wrong? Why is Mac Mickelson so good and I am so bad? Now, it was my first one ever. So
Yeah.
it was bound to not be as good as Max. But the gap in
Mm.
quality was so extreme, I had to figure out why. So that set me down a path to figure out, why is Max so good? Why am I not? How can I get better? Well, interpretation is a big part of what park rangers do.
Yeah.
And there is an actual formula to interpretation, I learned, that you, if you've ever been to a ranger guided hike, a campfire program, if you've been on a guided museum walk or a guided tour through a zoo, even on a tour bus, if it was a good interpreter, they used this framework on you. Now, I will tell you, I added one more piece because the original interpreter framework has three parts, and I wanted a fourth so it would spell the word swap. Because if you are interpreting the right way, then I am swapping my enthusiasm for the topic to you.
Oh, I love that.
So I needed the P, but and I'll get to that. The first one is S, so SWAP. S is for story.
Mhm.
You always begin by telling a story. The W is why. You tell why that story matters to the person in front of you. Not if I'm telling you a story, I don't tell you why it matters to me. I tell you why it matters to you.
Yeah.
The A is the action that you want people to take.
Okay.
That is usually where an interpretive program ends. If you come to my campfire program, and I'm going to talk about, I live in Washington State, so we really like salmon here. So if I'm going to tell you about salmon, I'll tell you a story about salmon. I'll tell you why a healthy salmon population matters to you. And then I'll give you a call to action on what you can do to help keep the streams clean and the salmon healthy and whatnot. So that's usually where it ends. But I realize when it comes to business storytelling, that's not quite often enough. And
Mhm.
this is where the P came in. One, because it needed one more action, and two, and then it would spell swap. But it's provoke.
Oh,
After you give the action you want them to take, then you need to provoke them to do it. And I don't have the quote in front of me, and I wish I did, but there's a wonderful book that if you're a park ranger, it's wonderful. If you're not in the parks, you may not find it so. It's called Interpreting Our Heritage by Freeman Tilden. It is like it was the first book ever written on interpretation, and every park ranger or interpreter reads that book because that's where it all began. And Freeman Tilden said the chief aim of interpretation is not instruction, but provocation. So you're doing this just to provoke someone into action.
oh, I love that.
And this swap framework can be used on podcast episodes. I don't, I will sometimes use it in an interview, but often I use it on a solo episode.
Mhm.
It can be used on stage when you're giving a presentation. It can be used in the boardroom to provoke the people around the table to do what you think should be done. It can be used even when you're writing. You can use this format. And it's been widely successful for me personally. But even though I came up with swap and added the P, the interpretation method has been used successfully for decades, ever
Yeah.
since Freeman Tilden came up with what interpretation is. People go to parks and they come away having a great experience, but also wanting to learn more, wanting to,
Yeah.
because the idea behind interpretation is that we will give you enough where you then want to learn more yourself.
Yeah.
And once you leave that campfire talk or that guided hike and start learning for yourself, well, that's when the real magic happens because you will then want to, if I gave you a talk about salmon, because that was my example earlier, then that's when you want to actually do something about it. You may find my talk entertaining because I told jokes and good stories and good facts and figures, but that may not leave you caring to do anything. So the aim of interpretation is to provoke you to do it. So that is the an introduction wrapped into the framework and where it all came from.
I love that. I love that because don't we know, Jody, as entrepreneurs or coaches or consultants, the ability to communicate with people, whether in a written form or on a podcast or on an interview or, as you said, in the boardroom, in our businesses. And I think that's what really intrigued me about your SWOT formula is I had already studied and known from being around great copywriters like Ray Edwards, right? Our good buddy. I knew the elements of great stories of having like a hook at the beginning and then telling a story and telling why it matters to somebody else and really shifting the focus off of you or me as the storyteller and onto somebody else. Like I understood all of those pieces conceptually, but when you wrapped in the provoke element, I was like, oh, that is an element. It was like a different take on what I thought I already knew, and you really like opened my eyes wider. So can we dive in a little bit deeper to the provoke piece and that step, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. Now, one thing I should mention as we move into provoke is there is, even though the swap is a framework to interpret, there may be pieces or times where the pieces are the focus. For example, there may be times where the story is the big focus, and then at the end, you tell why the action provoke.
Mhm.
There may be times, perhaps when you're instructing,
Mhm.
which if you're teaching a workshop, for example, I know you do wonderful workshops. Well, maybe in an hour workshop, the action could be 45 minutes of it.
Mm.
And then at the end, you provoke, but you start off with a story and tell why it matters. And then you spend all that time teaching and then you provoke them at the end.
Mhm.
So that brings us to provoke. And I got that from Freeman Tilden's quote
Okay.
that the chief aim is to provoke. And the more I thought about it, I realized, well, that's quite often what is missing when we talk. Like if I do a podcast workshop and someone says, "Oh, that was great information," and they know what to do next, they're just not quite doing it.
Mhm.
Well, what maybe I'm guilty of that. I'm sure you are, Anita. You
It happens.
go to a workshop, you go to a live event,
Yeah.
and you feel great about it. Oh, I'm really going to do this, and then you never follow through. I'm guilty of that more than I would like to admit, although I did just admit it.
Yeah.
And that's the pieces to provoke someone to do it. Now, that can come in different forms of showing what's in it for them.
Mhm.
It can often be about the audience in front of you, understanding what they want to get out of this. It will be different if it's one on one because you can use swap if it's just the two of us. You can use it if you're on a stage in front of 100 people,
Yeah.
and so that will change a little bit. But it's really about showing uh, what's in it for them, what's at stake, what they're going to miss, what they're going to gain. That's all part of provoking. Is you've put it all out there. Now you have to entice them or provoke them into doing that action that you just talked about
Yeah.
in one step prior.
Yeah. Mm. I love that. I'm actually thinking about just different applications if you're in the like in the sales cycle with somebody and you know that it's the right solution for them and you've walked them through identifying, doing the discovery of what their business is about, how you can help them, if you can help them, and then going through the process, but then being able to articulate that pain that they're in and the outcome that they're looking for. And if you're the one that has the solution to that, being able to, I'll use your word, to provoke them to be able to make a good, healthy decision so that they can walk forward in their business. They can get the outcome that you're promising them. They can, in some of my circles, they can create higher ticket offers, or they can get themselves out of a SAP escalation and save millions of dollars, right? Like there are some real, in business, there's some real tangible elements that we want to be able to communicate. Now, what's interesting, I notice in the market, especially having now spent the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years or so around copywriters. Um, Many people in the market, when I look at their marketing material, I look at their messaging, they actually don't start with any of this, Jody. Like what they start with, and I'm not knocking this. I'm just noticing it more. They start with, "Hey, look at me. I'm great. I have all this education, these accolades, these outcomes, all this kind of stuff." But their messaging is missing something because nobody cares about your messaging unless you're talking about what's in it for them, right? And so how do you ever help and coach people, like to help them see, first of all, to become more aware that their messaging is about them first, and it really needs to be about our prospects first, and that's what attracts people to us. And then do you ever help people like turn that around and have that conversation with them?
Yes, I've been lucky enough to work with people on that quite a bit. I get the chance to work with a lot of former executives that have had a wonderful career
Yeah.
and now they're on to building whatever is next for them.
Yeah.
And that can be, some people have no problem with that transition. Others, you go from a situation where you're used to just saying this is what should happen and it will happen.
Yeah.
But now it's a different world, and understanding what stories to tell, what words to use, the
Mm.
position to take, how to, well, to use some of Donald Miller's language from building a story brand.
Yeah.
If you're an executive, quite often you are the hero into whatever's happening on. You come in, you solve problems, all of
Great.
that. But now you have to guide other people into solving their own problems. And so that's part of the difference, is understanding, well, you've got to move your language, your stories, your positioning, your marketing from being about you to being about them,
Mm.
because that's all people really care about. What's
Yeah.
in it for me? What problem are you going to solve? And it's true, as a park ranger, it mattered what what was in it for the other people. Now, there are people, for example, that will show up and what's in it for them, they just want to learn some interesting facts. So when they go hiking for with their friends or their family, they can seem really smart.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, you'll have that crew. You'll have others that want to learn about their surroundings, and nature might be new to them
Mm.
and they're a little intimidated by it and they want to feel more comfortable. Okay, there's an outcome that's about them. You may have people that absolutely love nature but don't know what to do. They want to help out, they don't know what to do, and part of it is educating them and letting them understand where. So even as a park ranger, you had to understand what is in it for them. Why are they there in front of you listening to that story?
Yeah.
It's the same in business, that you have to understand what is in it for the people in front of you. What do they want out of it?
Mm.
And then you just help guide them in that direction. And then you help provoke them in that direction. And often, as Anita said, it's about what's in it for them, not what's in it for, like, don't position yourself as a big shot because they won't understand what's in it for them.
Right, right. I love that. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the executive coaching that you do, Jody? I'm so intrigued by that. And I know that some of our listeners, just based on the demographics of who we serve on this podcast, I think they'd be interested in that a little bit more.
Well, let's say you had a wonderfully successful career at a big company. You spent 30 years there,
Yeah,
and now you are going out into the market on your own to use all that expertise and knowledge to help other businesses.
yeah,
But we're not in an environment where you can just hang out a shingle that says, this is the company I used to
Right.
work for, and then get hired because you worked for a particular company.
Yeah.
You have to be able to say, yes, if you have, there are some companies that if you have that in your resume, it will certainly start a conversation with people.
Sure.
But then they want to know, what is it you can do for me,
Mhm.
as we've already been talking about. So you have to come from, if you come from a big company or a small company, just be able to say, this is what I'm an expert in, and
Yeah.
then position your stories and your words and all of that, your branding, positioning towards that expertise. So, one of the things I get to do, you've had this great 30-year career, and that's 30 years of stories, working with teams, failing, messing up, doing great things, big wins, learning. And quite often, you spent 30 years in that environment, and there are things that don't even feel that special to you because you're really good at them, or it was just part of the culture of the company.
Yeah.
So, you often it helps to have someone like me be able to say, wait a minute, that's pretty special. Let's talk about that.
Mhm.
So that's what we do. We dig through all that luggage and find where the good nuggets are, the stories that we should be talking about. And usually we'll boil it down. We'll take 30 years and bring it into three or four main pillars of, this is what holds the business up. This is what I talk about. This is what I'm an expert in.
Yeah.
And then from there, there can be little offshoots, but to have three big pillars of, this is what I talk about. So that's always the beginning. What are the three pillars? And then from there, what stories enhance that? What lessons should be taught out of that? How are you going to provoke people? What can you, if someone comes to see one of your presentations, what are they going to go away with?
Yeah.
And then you find a way to work in from those three pillars into presentations, blog posts, podcast interviews. If you host a podcast, and it can become a book. So it all starts with taking all decades of experience and just squeezing it and seeing what comes out the other end.
I love that. Do you ever have a scenario where, let's say you're working with a client and they're like, okay, Jody, these are my three main stories. And you're kind of like, ooh, I don't think, like maybe these two are good, but do not go down that road. That's not a good one. Or maybe they present it in a live format and it kind of flops. Like, how do you help them navigate and see, is it resonating? Because sometimes in our own minds, we can think that our information, our ideas, especially as entrepreneurs, if we've been in the entrepreneur for space, we could be like, I have the best idea ever. I'm going to sell tens of millions of dollars in this thing, whatever it is. And yet the market is not responding that way. So how do you help coach somebody in being able to recognize that and move away from my idea in my head, I think is the best thing in the world to wait a minute, but the market is telling us something else.
Well, ideally, I get to work with someone from the beginning and help shape that.
Yeah.
But there are times where someone already has content in place, and they wouldn't probably use this language, but they already have their pillars in place. And maybe one works and two don't, or two do and one doesn't, or they have just like Anita was talking about. This works, this doesn't. And how do you address that? Well, hopefully you can get audience feedback
Yeah.
or just a way to gauge it and say, hey, look, this is what's happening. And sometimes sales can be enough to say, okay, this, when you talk about this, sales go up. Nothing happens when you talk about this.
Right.
If there's metrics to show it, that certainly helps, because corporate people are more driven by metrics than entrepreneurs and coaches and consultants.
Yep.
Maybe we should be more metric driven.
Mhm.
We're usually not. That's a different conversation. But corporate people often are metric
Right.
driven because they're accountable in ways that we are not.
Right. And
So
they've been trained,
metrics,
right? They've been raised in a corporate environment that says everything you do has to be measured. Yes.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And metrics are often a good way to coach in that sense. The other thing is just being able to have conversations. If you tell me this is a presentation I've been giving, and I go and watch, and I'm like, well, okay, I was watching the crowd, and
Mhm.
there are pieces that just aren't connecting. Through conversation with you, probably without saying it, using the swap framework,
Yeah.
then I can provoke you into changing pieces of it.
Yeah.
That would be my hope that it's I'm always going to be a counselor through all of this.
Yeah.
And if you were the executive, you were the one who knew what you were doing. I'm just here to help you shape it all.
Mhm.
So if I want, depending on the relationship, how well I know you, I may outright say, you got to this go in this direction. And if we don't have that relationship, I will just try and provoke in other ways through metrics, through audience reaction, through feedback from outside sources. And maybe the feedback is sales or podcast downloads or how many times was the lead magnet downloaded, things like that. And quite often, it's just a string of experiments. I've worked with Lee Cockrell for 10 years now.
Mhm.
Lee Cockrell is the retired executive vice president of Walt Disney World. He ran the whole place. 45,000 cast members. Walt Disney World is as big as San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's huge. And Lee and I, over 10 years, have tried dozens of lead magnets, different ways to reach out, different, and every once in a while, we'll have an absolute flop. I can think of one lead magnet that got about 10 downloads.
Yeah.
It just wasn't a good mix, but we tried it. It didn't work. There's another one that we tried that was got 8,000 downloads.
Mhm.
So you experiment, you find what works, and then you really push on it. And we did. We pushed on the one that worked for years, and it still remains popular. And I think that's just part of it. Experimenting
Yeah.
and then being able to have the candid conversations of this is this didn't work. This is probably why. This
Yeah.
did work. Let's make sure we understand why it worked so
Right.
we can make sure it keeps working.
I love that. And I love your element of being able to track those elements of success or even I'll say learning opportunities, right? If something doesn't work, being able to recognize this is why something worked and this is why it didn't work, and then be able to what we do in our business, we just call it we iterate, right? We're always asking the market, give us feedback in the form of sales, give us feedback in the form of clicks, give us feedback in the form of the metrics that we track in our business to be able to determine is it successful or not successful. I know when I started out in the coaching space, I crafted an incredible offer. I thought it was, but my sales didn't reflect the same ideas that I had. And yet then I went and created another offer for a client and it was wildly successful, made an incredible amount of money. Like, so being able to, what I love about what you just said, Jody, is you're trying different things. You're iterating, you're trying, you're testing market feedback, you're listening to what the market is telling you in the form of whether people join your email list. I know in our business, we're looking for specifically for buyers, not just necessarily people to join our list so that we can, we're in the business to support and sell to people. And so I love that. I love the way that you talked about that. And you also, there's such a freedom when you talk about that, which is super exciting because your whole countenance is like, you try other things, you try a bunch of them, you see what works, you see what doesn't work. Like your whole body language and your posture, Jody, was we just try it and see what the market tells us, right? And so many entrepreneurs, I think sometimes can be so afraid and so fearful that they get stuck in this indecision. And then they don't do anything. And so, um, just being able to have the freedom to try some things and some stuff's going to be amazing. Maybe not everything will, right? If we listen to Oh gosh, I'm thinking of like Russell Brunson's stories in Expert Secrets or .com Secrets, right? Where he's talking about, well, I don't remember what the number is, so I might get it wrong, but let's say I tried 10,000 iterations of a product and it didn't quite, those didn't have the success that I wanted until I got to this, right? And he's been wildly successful in everything that he does. So, but he's always talking about in all of his messaging trying lots of different variations of headlines and copy and images and all that kind of stuff and products and seeing what the market tells him that they really, really want.
Yeah, he is a good example because he's one of the guys, and there are others like this that will try two versions of a sales page and just change the headline.
Yeah,
And then we'll change the pictures and then change the color of the button and then change the words on the button.
yeah,
And someone that is willing to try that many runs at it
mhm,
is going to find what is successful.
yeah,
And not many of us are willing to do that because it almost, if you come up with a program and nobody buys it, the natural thing is to shrink back and say, "Ooh, I'm not going to try that again."
yeah,
When really you just found out one way not to sell it. Okay, now
yeah,
try a different way.
yeah. Yeah, that's exciting. I was recently looking at I was sitting with one of my coaches, and she and I were looking at some ads that Grant Cardone ran. And when you go into Facebook Library, you can search on people's ads and stuff like that. And there were probably, oh gosh, maybe like 10 to 12 iterations of the same ad. And everything was the same. The hook was the same, the body copy was the same, the call to action was the same. But you could see how they were testing out all these different images. And I was like, now that is exciting to see because it gives us hope, especially in the context of this part of the conversation of trying these different iterations, trying these different variations of similar things. So what he's doing, the marketing term for it is I just lost, right? You're having a controlled environment and only testing one element to see what's actually hitting. So
Yeah.
he's what we're not saying is you're changing all parts of the copy or the call to action or the images or all that kind of stuff. You're testing it in a real controlled environment. And in that controlled environment, you're only changing one thing at a time. So if you just heard what Jody said, he was talking about maybe Russell Brunson trying out different variations, like what's called split testing in marketing, two different sales pages at the same time, and then changing one element at a time and then figuring out, oh, this is actually what lands, this is what works. So, and he's a great example of being able to do split tests and then figure out what works and run with it, right? And then pour gasoline on top of it and it goes like crazy. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so what else, Jody, about your swap method? Just kind of circling back around and being able, how in this conversation, how can we provoke some people to take some actions in their business, whether they've been in the corporate space and they want to be able to take that next step, or whether they're entrepreneurs and they want to be able to take that next step? How can we help some people and provoke them to take some action?
Well, I'm going to answer this in two ways.
Yeah.
One is I'm just going to show you as an example that if we're at the provoke stage of this podcast interview, which we are, this is when I could start talking about what you're missing out on by not using the swap framework, what you're leaving behind. I could talk about how this will improve your storytelling, your communication with people, and then the action, pull you back to the action that, hey, I want you to start to learn to use the swap framework and then tell people, oh, go here to get it. So, Anita, we should probably put something together for people to come and learn more about swap. So this is what we'll do at jodymayberry.com/swap. Now, there's no Y in my last name. It's Maberry. So jodymayberry.com/swipe or swap, and we'll have something there for you to learn more about swap, to go a little bit deeper into understanding what it is, how you can use it. So those both, and I use that as an example, but then also it's a real call to action. Hey, come to that site, reach out to me, learn. If you just want to contact me instead, and not, that's fine.
Yeah.
Just go to jodymayberry.com. There's a contact form. But you can go to jodymayberry.com/swap, and I'll have more ready for you about swap and what it is, how you can use it. And I do think there's a reason people love park rangers. It's beyond the flat hat. It's because park rangers tell you stories
Yeah.
that make you feel like you learned something, that make you feel like you're a pretty interesting person, and you feel like, well, when I get home, I'm going to learn more about that.
Yeah.
And you usually do. Well, this is why, because park rangers are good at interpretation. So if you want to bring interpretation into your business, this is a great way to start.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Well, Jody, thank you so much for being here. We'll make sure, just for everybody who's listening, we'll make sure to put a link to what he referred to in the show notes so that you have that, just be able to click on it. And Jody, I just want to thank you. I thank you for the way that you show up for your clients. I thank you for the way that you showed up for this podcast today. You are making a difference in what you're doing in the sphere of influence that you have. And so I'm so grateful to know you for all these years now. And yeah, thanks for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you, Anita. This was a wonderful conversation. You're just a delightful person. I enjoy you.
Oh, thanks. All right, everybody. Well, stay tuned. We'll see you on the next episode of the Wealthy SAP podcast. Welcome to the Wealthy SAP Consultant Podcast with your host, Anita Anello, where we empower SAP consultants to deliver premium services by showcasing their expertise to the world. In each episode, we dive deep into strategies, tips, and success stories to help SAP consultants like you elevate your consultancy game, attract high-paying clients, and maximize your revenue potential. Get ready to unlock the secrets to success in the SAP consulting world and position yourself as a top-tier consultant. To connect further and explore personalized strategies for your consulting business, schedule a strategy call with our team by clicking the link below. Enjoy the show.